us today and for a few weeks, I guess. So that's very, very nice. Okay. Well, we are going to take a look at the 14th chapter of Zechariah today. With all of the holidays and messages and everything else and all the distractions and of life that go on, I felt that this was not worthy of whatever kind of slides I could put together for today. So what I probably will do in this case is in about a week or so, you may be receiving an email with a PDF of slides of this chapter. This is the culmination of Zechariah's prophecy. And it just worked out so well for us that it's right on Sukkot. You know, didn't really plan it that way until toward the very end. But it really worked out quite well. The 14th chapter is like the crowning chapter of this great book of the Bible, and I just remembered something. Okay? I know, I don't know what's happening today. But anyway, I remember earlier I said that, wow, you know, I had sent out an email asking for pictures of your sukkah. And I did get some. And lo and behold, we have them. So this is Diana Barnett's sukkah. Now I got to say, I would not mind living in Diana's sukkah 12 months a year. It's gorgeous. Now, something else that she does, and I don't remember if she sent me the picture or this was on a Facebook post, but remember when we had our Sukkot celebration, we do this thing at the very beginning, Ush Pizin, which means kind of like guests, and we welcome the patriarchs. So each night, she accentuates one of the patriarchs and has like a nice visual of that, and it's really beautiful. Okay, very good. So that's one. Okay, now this one, I think we can see from other planets, right? This is the Glover's Sukkah. And what's really neat about this, and this is really, I will say, this reminds me of the typical Sukkah. You know, really, very, very much so. But I love the fact that, I don't know, is it the lighting or the material? You can see it from like a distance at night. And that's really pretty cool. That's pretty nice. Okay, so there we go. And then this one is Janice Stewart's sukkah. And again, what a sukkah is supposed to be is a structure. I told you about the one that I grew up with, burlap. Burlap and branches and pieces of wood. You know, and so these are great. I really appreciate it. I see that, you know, there's room to sit down and like, you know, for to pray, to think, to read, to eat. It's really great. So I really appreciate receiving these pictures because, you know, that is the traditional thing to do. The traditional thing to do is to build a sukkah at your house. You know, and spend time in the sukkah at home. During COVID, when we were not having services, we really accentuated that, if you remember. And a lot of people built sukkahs at home. And of course, we have our big Beth Messiah sukkah for all to enjoy. So thank you for that, everyone. Thank you, Diana. Tiffany and Josiah, and Janice. Really appreciate that very much. And if you have built a sukkah, please send it. I will show it, and that would really be a blessing for us. Okay? All right. Here now, back to the 14th chapter of Zechariah. And it is the culminating chapter. It is really the chapter that brings together so much of what Zechariah had prophesied and about the future. It is about a judgment on Israel, God coming and judging the nations, Israel participating in some way in that, a description of the new a new geography in the land, a unique. The uniqueness of the day of the Lord and what it will be like, both an external and internal restoration. We see here a reconciliation between the nations and God, the nations and themselves, the nations and Israel, and of course the reconciliation of the nations and Israel, and the nations and God and Israel is pictured in Sukkot, in the mention of Sukkot. And then finally we see that Jerusalem itself is as it were the temple, the holy place. When you read the book of Revelation, you see some similar words being said, especially at the very end in the last chapter of the book of Revelation. And it just goes to show you how important this chapter is to the prophetic word of God and the hope of Israel and the hope of this world. So the very beginning says, "Behold, a day is coming for the Lord, when the spoil taken from you will be divided among you." In other words, something similar to what we have seen elsewhere that many refer to as a reversal of fortune. That Israel, at the end of the day, Israel will be vindicated. I think that's the best way to really say that. It's about the vindication of Israel, the vindication of God's people, the vindication of all who live and identify with the kingship of the Messiah. And remember that the Messiah's kingship is the Davidic dynasty. And that is why in this Haftorah portion from this week, in Ezekiel chapter, that was Exodus. I keep thinking Ezekiel 34. Exodus 34. That we read about really the kingship of God in this passage and his attributes. And we see those attributes come into play in this chapter of Scripture. So the beginning is sort of the theme, but you have to read the whole chapter to get that, because you have this startling juxtaposition of verses here between verses 1 and 2, right? Here, a day is coming for the Lord when the spoil taken from you will be divided among you. All right, good news. But whoa, look at verse 2. "For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city will be captured, and the houses plundered, and the women ravaged, and half the city exiled. But the rest of the people will not be cut off from the city." Now, there's a few things here to see. Notice it says, "I will gather the nations against Jerusalem." That this is the time of Jacob's trouble. This is the time of Jacob's distress that we read about, for example, in the 12th chapter of Daniel. we read this. You also read it in Jeremiah chapter 30 and verse 7. But here, we'll just turn to this one. In Daniel chapter 12 in verse 1. Now at that time, Michael, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise. And there will be a time of distress, such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, everyone who is found in the book, will be rescued. So it's going to be a terrible time. Yes, there will be a remnant who will be rescued, but a terrible time. In Jeremiah chapter 30, depending on your translation, a time of Jacob's trouble, a time of Jacob's distress. And it is quite clear whether you are reading rabbinic commentary, ancient the rabbis, the Christian authors, whoever it may be, that there is a horrific time coming for Israel just before the Messiah appears. It's quite clear. And you know what's interesting about that is we used to say, before a year ago, we used to say, you know, when you look back at the Holocaust, you say, how could anything be so terrible, right? And certainly that in and of itself was the most horrendous thing that has ever happened to Israel, to the Jewish people. And that was in the middle of the 20th century. It wasn't like in the Middle Ages, or way back in Solomon's day or the Romans. The Nazi trumped the Romans when it comes to the persecution of Jews. But now, all of us, we don't have to think back now about 70, 80 years ago on a smaller scale. Now, all we have to do is look back to October 7th in Israel. And we see this type of horror. In fact, when you look at this verse in chapter 14 of Zechariah, it really is pretty much what happened on that horrible day of October the 7th. When you look at the things that took place, this is what took place in those moshavim and kibbutzim in Israel. And so it's not hard to visualize anymore, you know. We also read in the 13th chapter that the 2/3 of Israel will die, and 1/3 will live. It says in chapter 13, just a few verses back in verse 8, it will come about in all the land, declares the Lord, that 2 parts of it will be cut off and perish, but 1/3 will be left in it, and I will bring the 3rd part through the fire. Now, chapter 14 is kind of describing that event. Let us not think that Israel is immune from the judgment of God, that it's always just the victim of nations. But God uses those nations, and then God judges those nations. That is indeed the truth. And it is quite clear. You know, the famous passage, we mentioned it on Rosh Hashanah. I always like to mention it because we sing it as a song of praise. Get up on a high mountain, sound an alarm on your holy mountain, you know, and we sing it like we're clapping hands, and we're, you know, it's about the judgment of Israel. Okay, you know, to me, that is exhibit A of making a song and not realizing whatsoever the context of it. It's unbelievable when you really think about that. And so we do certainly read about it. But in the Brit Hadashah, in the New Covenant, in 1 Peter chapter 4, in verse 17, remember that I said this a minute ago, that a lot of these events pertain to Israel and also all who come under the kingship of the Messiah of Israel, the Davidic kingship, right? So I know we love to identify that way, and it means a lot. Like, we're all part of this thing. Well, here's, everything has good news and bad news, right? So in 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 17, we read this: "For it is time for judgment to begin with the household of God. And if it begins with us first, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God?" And so if God judges Israel, what is he going to do to the nations? If God, judges us, what will indeed be the outcome for the world? But let us not miss this first part, what Peter says. For it is time for judgment to begin with the household of God. That is a scary thought, my friends. When we identify with Messiah Yeshua, and we all, we atomize this so much. We make it so individualized that it's just me and God, and I'm going to stand before God all by myself, and it's just me and God, me and God. No, recognize this, that we are all responsible for one another. As Abraham Joshua Heschel said, few are guilty, all are responsible, right? So we may like to point fingers, at this one and that one, and what a bad representation of Yeshua. Well, my friends, the day is going to come when we are all in this together. And so may we do our part to be a blessed representation of covenant relationship with God and Messiah Yeshua. Because we see here what is going to happen to our people. And when we see these terrible things happening, again, they should be like a wake-up call to us. A wake-up call. Whether they're happening to Jewish people in Israel or anti-Semitism around the world, or what happens to believers, in all kinds of places in the world, persecution and such. Right? All right. Now, then we read in verse 3, "Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as when he fights on a day of battle." Okay, so now there's good news that these bad things are going to happen, but Israel is not going to be left destitute. And that's what we see, and I don't have time to read it. You can go back. What we looked at in the 12th chapter. We see some of that in the 12th chapter, right? But here, it's accentuated and described a little bit more. Now, if you jump down to verses 12 to 15. Verses 12 to 15. This is this is not written in an order for a thematic order exactly. And so if you read verses 12 to 15, this describes how God is going to jump in and what's going to happen and how that plays out. Now this will be the plague with which the Lord will strike all the peoples who have gone to war against Jerusalem. Notice he uses the word plague. Just notice that. Kind of a throwback to Egypt. Okay. And a throw forward to the book of Revelation. Also, by the way. Now this will be the plague with which the Lord will strike all the peoples who have gone to war against Jerusalem. Their flesh will rot while they stand on their feet, and their eyes will rot in their sockets, and their tongues will rot in their mouths. Okay? By the way, it is kind of interesting, eyes and tongues. We often read verses like, they don't have eyes to see, and what comes out of the mouth is evil, and so on. And it is, in a way, God saying that he's saying, I'm going to judge the whole person. I'm going to judge the whole person, And it will come about in that day that a great panic from the Lord will fall on them, and they will seize one another's hand, and the hand of one will be lifted against the hand of another. And then it says, and Judah also will fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the surrounding nations will be gathered, gold, silver, garments, and great abundance. So also, like this plague, will be the plague on the horse, the mule, the camel, the donkey, and all the cattle that will be in those camps. Kind of like a cherem, kind of like what you read in Joshua. A curse on a people, and everything in it. Remember how Achan took, and he wasn't supposed to, and so that's kind of like what this is describing. This is describing this judgment on those who have come against Israel, and evidently. At some point after this judgment on Israel, those who are left in Jerusalem, this perhaps 1/3 of people, will rise up, like we read in the 12th chapter, and will become a strong and will be victorious in the Lord. Okay? Now, if you go back now, to verse 4, now we see what it's going to kind of look like. Now, again, we love things to be on like a time frame and in a linear, exactly. Like at 5 of 10, he's going to land at the Mount of Olives. Then at 10:30, the nations will be destroyed, and 11 o'clock, no. We don't exactly know the time frames of these things, but the point of a lot of it is that God is king over all the earth and over the natural world and over the nations and over Israel, and everybody's accountable, and God will do with this world what he wants to do. That is, if you want a real takeaway, that's kind of the takeaway. But in verse 4, it says, and in that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which is in front of Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives will be split in its middle from east to west by a very large valley, so that half the mountain will move toward the north and the other half toward the south. So, and then in verse 5, it says, and you will flee by the valley of my mountains, for the valley of the mountains will reach to Azel, which nobody really knows exactly where it is. Yes, you will flee, just as you fled before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. There's like 20 things in this verse. Right? Okay. So you have a description of a change of geography. Okay. Now, if you jump down now, okay, to verse 10, and all the land will be changed into a plain from Geba to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem. But Jerusalem will rise and remain on its site from Benjamin's gate as far as the place of the first gate to the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananel to the king's wine presses. And then it says, and people will live in it, and there will be no more curse, for Jerusalem will dwell in security. Okay? So what we see here is this is the description of this change of geography of Jerusalem. And there's a couple of observations to make. One is the use of earthquake is very interesting in the Bible. It's used in Jewish apocalyptic literature to speak of an upheaval and of judgment. We don't have time for it, but in Ezekiel chapter 38, 38:18, get that? 38:18 to 23, you read about this big earthquake that's going to take place. And then in the book of Revelation, in the 16th chapter, you read about an earthquake. And you read that there was an earthquake, evidently, when Uzziah was king, and it was so significant that Amos dates his prophecy from that, using that earthquake as a time of demarcation. So there's that. It would be quite an upheaval. Then you read, then the Lord my God will come and all the holy ones with him. Wow, right? His entourage is going to come. Perhaps from the divine council, angels, hosts, the Lord of hosts. But this is going to be, this will have worldwide ramifications. Everybody is going to know it. It's going to be an objective reality in this world at that time. And for the people that lived in Zechariah's day, it was, wow, let's keep going. Let's make sure we're living the covenant way of life, and we're rebuilding the temple, and no matter what happens to us, there is a future for us and our people and the plan of God. And God is more powerful than the Persian gods and the Greek gods and all of it. And may we also get that takeaway from it. Now, notice it also says, yes, you will flee, just as you fled before the earth, you will flee. Does that remind any of you Bible people of another passage about this time period? Matthew chapter 24 in verse 20. Pray that it's not Shabbat when you're running, when you're fleeing, right? Isn't it interesting how I'm going to suggest that this chapter played a role in so much of what we read in Yeshua's words about the future, what we read in the book of Revelation about the future. And I will say that Zechariah was influenced by the prophets who came before him in talking about the future. For so many of the passages, the verses here, have similar passages prior to the time of Zechariah. So not only is there going to be a change of geography. Now, let me say something else about the change of geography. This is not a change of geography for the sake of, let's build more houses on this street or something. It's not just a civil engineering feat that the world will marvel. But if you read the whole thing carefully, what's going to happen is Jerusalem is surrounded by ridges. They're not like mountains like Mount Everest, or Mount Washington, or not those kind of mountains. They're kind of like ridges and big, large hills. But what's going to happen is there's going to be this movement, and Jerusalem will kind of like rise and be seen. It'll be high up. And that reminds me of another passage of Scripture, not of Jerusalem rising, but of Jerusalem descending. When we read about New Jerusalem, it's the centerpiece. Now, I'm going to tell you, I think I mentioned this sometime on Sukkot, but when it talks about Jerusalem descending, it's not like aliens from outer space, okay? It's not going to be like, those movies and TV shows like where you see this giant something coming down. And no, it is about the glorification of Yerushalayim, the glorification of Jerusalem. So you see it here as like land masses moving, okay? And so, in a way, it's kind of like the Red Sea parting. God can do anything with this world. He is the creator of heaven and earth. He is the king of heaven and earth. He is the sovereign of heaven and earth. And he is the one to be reckoned with, and the one who will glorify his name and fulfill his covenant with his people. It should encourage us. But now something else very interesting is going to happen. Wow. It will come about in that day that there will be no light. The luminaries will dwindle. Okay. For it will be a unique day which is known to the Lord, neither day nor night, but it will come about that at the evening time there will be light. What? What is that saying? May I suggest that what this is saying is that the way the world was created is going to now, it's going to change. Can we actually really articulate it perfectly? No, we can't. But what we do know is, and to me, what is very significant, it's in the real world. I mean, there's a description of changes in this real world, not another world, not somewhere in another dimension, somewhere else. But in this world, there will be real changes. And one of them will be that the sun and the moon and the stars will not, they may be there, but they're not going to give light. They're not going to give light. Light is going to come because of the presence of God. And that's why it says at nighttime there'll be light. This is not saying that there will be no light. When it says the luminaries will dwindle, that is kind of it's an odd word in Hebrew, and it gives the impression almost of like being covered up, like being covered up, of being like muffled, kind of. So the point is there'll be supernatural light. God is going to change the geography, and there'll be supernatural light. I will say this. Some people may look at this and just give it as a metaphor of God being king over all the earth. And I will say it'll be what it'll be, but I'm certainly not against taking it as for what it says, when that is indeed possible. Just give the word the benefit of the doubt of what it says right here. Right? So you have that, a unique day, a unique time, the day of the Lord. Do you know that sometimes when you study the day of the Lord, it's nice to categorize it as like a Jewish day. You have dusk, darkness, dawn, and then the light. The dusk and the darkness, the judgment, the coming judgment, the worst of all judgments, and then dawn, the Messiah coming in his glory, and then the light of the day. And the light of the day not just being a nice day with no clouds in it, but the light of God, the light of Messiah Yeshua being the light. And in the following verses, we see something similar, and I'll say something about this idea of the light of God yet being in the real world. It's really, I think, very interesting. Now, in verse 8, it says, "And it will come about in that day," not only is there going to be this change of geography, not only is there going to be a difference in the heavenlies, the sky, the moon, the stars, and all that, But also, it says, in that day, living waters, Mayim Chaim, will flow out of Jerusalem, half of them toward the eastern sea, and the other half toward the western sea. It will be in summer as well as winter. Now, the eastern sea is either going to be what we call Galilee or the Dead Sea. And of course, the western sea is the Mediterranean Sea. Okay? Summer and winter is also kind of interesting because summer and winter is not when water flows very well. Spring and fall, that's a time of water flowing. So summer and winter, it's just kind of interesting that these times of year when water is scarce. So kind of interesting. But this living waters, waters that sustain. Living water comes from the book of Jeremiah chapter 2, a great passage of Scripture, right? Jeremiah chapter 2 and verse 13, my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, to hew for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water, right? And so living waters denote abundant life, waters that sustain, that only come from God, the presence of God, like the light, the living waters and the light God provides. And of course, wow, what a coincidence that on Sukkot, Yeshua refers both to living waters and light. How could it be? Right? There must be something Jewish about this thing, I guess, you know? All right. So at the end of John 7, we read in the Haftorah, the New Covenant portion, that it was Sukkot, right, where Yeshua is giving this speech, right? And so he says here those famous words, now on the last day, the great day of the feast, of course, that was the seventh day, Hoshana Rabbah, a time of really praying for rain, and later on, post Second Temple, there are evidences of people praying for the Ruach, praying for what Joel chapter 2 to take place, you know, the pouring out of the Ruach. It's really kind of interesting. But anyway, it says, now on the last day, the great day of the feast, Yeshua stood and cried out, saying, if any man is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture said, from his innermost being shall flow rivers of living water. You read it here in Zechariah chapter 14. You also read it later on toward the end of Zechariah, where we read about this, the temple being basically Jerusalem, and living waters coming out from underneath. It's really fascinating. But Yeshua brings this out. And then John helps us out in verse 39. He gives us like a little commentary in verse 39. He says, but this he spoke of the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive. For the Spirit was not yet given because Yeshua was not yet glorified. And so, when the Ruach is poured out, when we receive Messiah into our lives, we have this living water and it oozes out of us. This living water, abundant life. We do not have to be thirsty for things that do not satisfy. And so, therefore, wow, we experience this today. We can talk about Israel's future today. May it be true in our lives, and may we be reminded of on Sukkot about living waters within us. But isn't it also interesting that in the 8th chapter, in the 12th verse, that here it's still Sukkot. And I mentioned this on Sukkot, that custom that we read about, and none of us were actually present, I don't think. But we read about that on Sukkot, they would put these big vats of oil in different locations around the temple in old garments of the priests as like big wicks, and they would light them up. And the temple complex would be all lit up, right? Almost as a prophetic word about the future of Jerusalem, you know? And so Yeshua says, again, therefore, Yeshua spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. It's like all of this stirred up together, all of these metaphors, all these pictures, all of these descriptions of the future come together in Messiah Yeshua. But we might cry out and say, well, we don't see it in the world. We will. We will. And how do we know that? Because we have a testimony of that truth within us as individuals and as a community. We have the first fruits of it. We have the beginning of it. We know it. And may we shout it from the rooftops. So now we see this great thing. So this word, a quick word about this idea that we see physical manifestations, and then we might say, manifestations of the Ruach, right? And that is, I would say, in the cosmic sense, or the big scheme of things, that's what should be true in our own lives. There should be very visible manifestations of the presence of Yeshua in our lives. Not just, I love the worship, and I pray and read my Bible, but that the way we actually conduct ourselves in this world, there should be a change in the geography of our lives. The tectonic plates of our lives should shift when we know Messiah. There should be an earthquake. Mountains turn to valleys and all of that. It may not happen all at once, but it should never be business as usual. So here we see it in truly the land. At the end, there will be that kind of magnificence of God. And may we see it in ourselves, other than saying, I know it's true and it's really cool and great, that we really do see it in our lives. So then what's going to happen? Wow. So now we see, okay, the land is going to change. There'll be different light, the light of God, the presence of God, satisfaction forevermore. Israel and the nations around them will dwell in security. Let me pause and say, when you watch the news today, don't you wish it was that? Don't we look forward to it, and don't we lament that it isn't? We should, not just what's new, but if only we got to this place. We are going to get to this place. And this is the message of hope that we have. Not just a message of gloom and doom and military strategy and all of that. Yes, we live in a world and we have all of that, of course. But we need to stay above the fray and see this great hope that we have and not get sucked into the quicksand of what's going on around us. And this is what Zechariah is saying to these people. Well, now what? What could be more? Then, in verse 16, it will come about that any who are left of all the nations that went against Jerusalem. So that means this is not the annihilation of anybody, right? There will be plenty of people who are going to know Messiah because he's done all these things. At the end, there's going to be this great revival of Israel and the nations. And so when we read about these things and, Israel being saved and remnants from the nations, it's not about people from years ago. It's about this is what's going to happen in that day, right? This is what's going to happen in that day. And just like today, as it is in that day, people that don't know Messiah will die, and there's a judgment. They'll die, and there's a judgment. It happens now. It will happen then. But the wonderful thing is that many are going to embrace Yeshua in that day as a result of these miraculous things taking place. So then it will come about that any who are left of all the nations that went against Jerusalem will go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to celebrate Sukkot. To celebrate Sukkot. And let me read this. And it will come about, and it will be that whichever of the families of the earth does not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, there will be no rain on them. And if the family of Egypt does not go up or enter, then no rain will fall on them. It will be the plague with which the Lord smites the nations who do not go up to celebrate the Feast of Booths. This will be the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of all the nations that do not go up to celebrate the Feast of Booths. It says it like 5 times, right? And so there's a couple of observations that we don't usually make. Again, Egypt. Egypt sort of becomes here the poster child of nations that have been enemies, but will be saved in that day. And we do read about Egypt and Assyria, believing in the Lord in that day in Isaiah chapter 19. So Egypt is used as one of those nations. So I will just tell you, there's going to be peace in that day. Whether we're talking about Iran, Iraq, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, Palestinian people, Turkey, any of it. In that day, all that will be left are those who embrace the Lord. And no one's getting annihilated. God is not destroying every single person of a people group. And so that's, we understand the events of today, but these are not the events of today. This is God coming and making it all right. And how important indeed that, that we understand that. So what a great future. This is a real future for real people, not just a theological construct called Israel, but real people in real places where there will be real peace and real redemption in this world where God will indeed be king in it and be the recognized king in it. Okay? Now, a couple of other things to say very briefly. I can't do this in like 2 weeks. This is coming today. All right, we're almost done. Okay, so Sukkot, the celebration of Sukkot. Why Sukkot? Why Sukkot? Why not Passover? Why not Shavuot? That seems to mean so much to us. Well, there are reasons for it. Some say that study these things that Sukkot is, the rabbis would say, some of them would say, it is the anniversary of the victory over the nations. It's going to take place at Sukkot, and so Sukkot will be observed. I will say, others say that Sukkot at this time was the supreme celebration. It was the ultimate celebration of God's presence, His love, His provision, all of it. And so to denote this great celebration of the unity of people groups, Sukkot will be We have talked already over the holidays about the relationship of Sukkot to other holidays. So we'll say that. Sukkot is sometimes called the feast of the Lord. It also represents and accentuates the greatness of the land, the provision of the land. And that seems to be a big part of what's going on here, is accentuating the land, the centrality of Jerusalem. And then there is that second temple teaching about that the sukkah, that God having Israel dwell in Sukkot was understood to be the light of God, travel, the cloud of glory, the cloud of God traveling with Israel, and that the day will come when, and in fact, the earliest midrashim, the earliest ones it's called the Tanaic period. That's like the closest to the New Covenant era. They accentuate this. And the belief is that it was a heavenly sukkah, and that the heavenly sukkah is coming back. The heavenly sukkah will be here again. You can let the kids in if you want. I don't care. Okay? And the glory of God will be revealed. And that's what you see in this text. That's what you see in Zechariah 14. And could it be a reflection of that? I will say that one way or the other, I can't say that, yes, Zechariah wrote it because of that teaching. But I would suggest that teaching came from Zechariah. That the teaching comes from, is influenced by this passage. Another thought about Sukkot is that, we cannot make peace in the world. As much as anybody tries, over the course of humanity, no one knows how to bring lasting peace and well-being to people. Nobody knows how to do it, right? And so it reminds us of our own futility, but that only God can bring it. And so Sukkot, what does it remind us of? It reminds us of our own futility, right? And therefore Sukkot. And by the way, there is also a great midrash about the Romans. It's like, did you hear the one about the Romans and the Persians who come to God and want to be included in all this? And they show God all of the great buildings and all of the great cities and all the great things. And God says, that's really nice, but you know what? The only thing I really want you to do is build a sukkah. It's really a great story to bring out this very same truth among the nations. Again, being influenced by this passage in Zechariah at chapter 14. And then the very last thing about this is that Sukkot is the last of the feasts. When you read Leviticus chapter 23, it's the final one. And we know, beginning with Passover, the death, the resurrection of Yeshua, his ascension, the pouring out of the Ruach, the sound of the shofar, and the Day of Atonement, speaking of the end of the beginning and the end of all these things happening, and people coming and recognizing the Messiah, and then what's left but celebration of kingdom in its wholeness, the consummation, and how exciting is that? And so, what a great holiday this is for that. Then the very last thing here, in verses 20 and 21, in that day there will be inscribed on the bells of the horses, "Holy to the Lord," and the cooking pots in the Lord's house will be like bowls before the altar. And every cooking pot in Jerusalem and in Judah will be holy to the Lord of hosts. And all who sacrifice will come and take them and boil in them. And there will no longer be a Canaanite in the house of the Lord of hosts in that day. Speaking of Canaanites, speaking of ungodliness and so on. But what it is saying is that the entire environment of Israel and Judah, that whole environment of the centrality of the center of Israel will be holy, because God will be dwelling in their midst, and there will no longer be tears and crying, and there will no longer be sadness, there will no longer be mourning, and there will no longer be any need of light, for the Lord will be in the midst, and he will make it all right. And so at the very end of Zechariah, we have this great statement about peace, unity, the presence of God, all of it. And a great, I shouldn't say commentary, but a great prophetic word about this, to end this, is in the 22nd chapter of the book of Revelation, where we read, "And he showed me a river of the water of life, clear as crystal, coming from the throne of God and of the Lamb, in the middle of its street. And on either side of the river was a tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit every month." Talk about Sukkot, right? "And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And there shall no longer be any curse. And the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his bondservants shall serve him. And they shall see his face, and his name shall be on their foreheads." Oh, I forgot something. "And there shall no longer be any night. And they shall not have need of the light of a lamp, nor of the light of the sun, because the Lord shall illumine them." Right from there, Zechariah, right? "And they shall reign forever and ever. And he said to me, these words are faithful and true. And the Lord, the God of the spirits of the prophets, sent his angels to show to his bondservants the thing which must shortly take place." That is what this world has to look forward to. And you know that back in Zechariah, oh my word, I would have really been kicking myself if I did not say this. In chapter 14, we read in verse 9, this is what it's going to be like. And you know, do you know that you know this in Hebrew? You do. You do. Okay, I'm going to start singing verse 9, and you all join in. "V'nemar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad Ushemo, accentuating, Ushemo echad." That means, and the Lord will be king over all the earth. In that day, the Lord will be the only one, and his name the only one. In other words, applying the Shema, as it were, to the whole world. You know, the only one. There will be no other God named. And you know, in Judaism, well, you know what's believed is that, you know, we don't know how to pronounce that name. Yud-He Vav-He, right? We say all kinds of Adonai. Some say Yud-He Vav-He. What the rabbis say is, in this day, everybody's going to know the name and pronounce it and say it. So that's kind of neat. But the point is, wow, that is something to look forward to. And that should give us hope when we look at the world today. Let's pray.